So in this video I'll be showing you how to replace the spark plugs of your Sportster, followed by a quick ride to test out the new spark plugs. Just as a quick background, my Sportster is a 2020 Iron 883 and I had this bike since new. What triggered me to look at replacing the spark plug was that I started to notice that I was getting about 20% less fuel economy on my bike, and more so, my engine started to feel like it vibrated a bit more than usual. When I checked my service manual, it said to switch out my spark plugs every 48,000 kilometers or every 2 years, whichever comes first. Given that my bike is 2.5 years old, it kinda made sense now. For this you'll only need a couple of things. First, you'll need a new pair of spark plugs. You can get an OEM from Harley-Davidson, but I decided to go with a third-party product because it's cheaper and more readily available. I went with a pair of NGK Iridium IX DCPR 7EIX, and I'll be sure to provide an Amazon link in the description. Secondly, you will need a spark plug gap gauge. These are fairly cheap and nice to have in your tool chest, and this gap gauge will come in handy when you need to calibrate the gaps for the new spark plugs. Lastly, you need a 16mm deep socket or a 5/8 socket, and as well your favorite socket wrench to loosen or tighten the spark plugs. Okay, so now we're at the bike with the tools. One thing I forgot to mention was that you probably want to invest in a torque wrench because you don't want to over tighten the spark plugs onto your motorcycle. So based on the manual that I got, it should be in between 11 to 18 foot-pounds of torque. Right now I have it set at 15. When you get on the motorcycle on the left side, simply what you do is you just kind of pull and the spark plug is now exposed. So you do that for both ends. Okay, sometimes it takes a little bit of wiggling. Next thing you want to do is simply just loosen the older spark plugs, but once this is open, it is exposed to the engine side, so you do not want any debris going inside of the spark plug hole when you take the spark plugs out. So now the old spark plugs are out. At this point, what you want to do is inspect the color and the status of the old spark plug. If you're doing this often, then obviously you can clean the spark plug, and if it's still healthy, you can reuse it. But for me, I've been using these spark plugs over 2 years now, which is time for replacement, even though the kilometers are still super low. Now, what you do with the old one is you measure the gap with the gap gauge and then replicate it to your new spark plug. So we'll start from the lowest point and then work our way up to see how thick it is or what the gap is. Like so, and then slowly slide over until you meet some resistance. So in inches, it's about 0.044, and then in metric, it's about 1.1 millimeters, and that's what we need to measure for the new ones. Be sure to inspect it that it doesn't look like it's already used, because I've seen some complaints from purchasing spark plugs from Amazon that the sparks look like it's already been used. But as you can tell, it's brand new. And then when I put the disc in, it is definitely tight. Right now it's showing 0.03, and I need to increase it by at least 0.015 more. So I'm gonna pry this a little bit higher. Okay, now it's at 0.043. Go a little higher. Okay, there. May have gone a little bit too far. Let's see. Yeah, gone a little bit too far. So in that case, you just kind of squeeze it down just a bit. 0.044. Perfect. So now these are calibrated. Let's bring it to the motorcycle and get it on. Okay, so the new one's going in on the front side. And what you want to do is first hand tighten it, and then using your socket wrench, hopefully a torque wrench, set it between 11 to 18 foot-pounds of torque. Right now I have it set to 15, and tighten it down. So let's put it in. Okay, so it's finger tightened. Now, if you do not have a torque wrench, on the manual it says a quarter turn from being snug using a socket wrench. But because I have a torque wrench, I'm going to use that, set at 15 foot-pounds of torque. I'm using a 5/8 size socket. So after I tightened it to about 15 foot-pounds of torque, I found it a little bit too snug, so I loosened it a bit. So now I changed my specs to about 12 foot-pounds of torque on both sides. It's definitely snug in there, and it's not too tight that it's going to seize up when it's time for me to switch them out the next time. So now what you want to do is plug these back in. Just make sure you do a quick inspection inside here to make sure it's clean and it's not corroded. And then all you do is just plug it in until you can feel it go in. Okay, so the new spark plugs are in, and now what you want to do is turn it on to make sure that it works. Okay, just like that. It didn't seem like it had any issues turning the engine over, which means it's seated properly and connected properly. We'll just have to do a quick test ride to make sure that this is good to go. So without further ado, let's get going. Please turn on, because that would suck. Everything hopefully is seated properly. Okay. Let it warm up and we'll go for a ride. It's always good to see it not blowing up after you do some work on your motorcycle. One thing I'm looking out for is the RPM to make sure that it goes down. It is going down while it's on idle or warming up. It's usually around 1300 when I start taking off. Yeah, which is good. Let's get going. Woo! You know, it might be a placebo effect or whatever, but I do feel like the bike is a bit smoother, especially on idle or like in low gears. Like, it's not vibrating as much as it had been in the last few months. The biggest kicker is to figure out what the fuel economy is like, because lately my gas meter or my gas light turned on around like 150, 145 kilometers, which is about 30 kilometers less than what it usually does. Or at least in my first 2 years of riding, that light used to kick on around 170 kilometers, but now hitting at 140, it started to get me a little bit worried, which is why the first thing I looked up was like symptoms of poor fuel economy. And the first thing that came up was check the spark plugs and see if it has been replaced in the last few years. And I'm like, nope, it has not. And then the more I read about the symptoms of a bad or poor spark plug, it started to all make sense of how my bike was reacting throughout the last few months. But yeah, for the amount of work that it required, whoa, what am I hearing here? What the fuck's going on? Oh, okay, fire truck. It's going my way. That's always fun. Where was I? Yeah, so for the amount of work and the skillsmanship that you require to change out the spark plugs, which is absolutely zero amount of work, all you gotta do is purchase a pair online or go to your local automotive store, pick up the OEM spark plugs for a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, or purchase an aftermarket part like the way I did for like half the price. And so far it's working out, man. If it's increasing my fuel efficiency, even for 1 or 2 fill-ups of my gas tank, it's already saving me a lot of money for the little amount of work and the little cost I put in to maintain my motorcycle. But she is running a lot more smoother, 100%. Like, I feel a lot less vibration going through my foot pegs, because that's what I used to feel in the last few months, where I start to feel vibration on the foot pegs. Turns out it was the spark plugs. What I should have done though was change the spark plugs when I filled up the tank 100%, so I can give you guys an A and B comparison, but you have to wait till the next iteration to let my viewers know whether or not it has improved my fuel efficiency. In between that time, the next thing that I'm going to be doing for my maintenance is to change out the engine oil, and that should be relatively easy work from what I've seen, and it's going to save me a couple $100 for not doing it at the dealership. And even for this job here alone, for changing out the spark plugs, I think I saved a couple $100 as well. But yeah, I think she rips pretty good, kind of like new. So I would definitely recommend anyone who has their Sportster for, I don't know, over 2 years, and if they have not switched out their spark plugs yet, highly recommended that you do so, just like the manual says, every 2 years or thousands of miles afterwards. It'll definitely improve your motorcycle's performance, or maintain its performance, should I say. I guess I wouldn't say that it improves anything, because it's just bringing it back to its original factory state when you first got the motorcycle. But regardless, it has improved from using your old pair of spark plugs. My next job, as I stated before, will be the oil change. So if you want to stick around or watch that tutorial and my recommendation of whether or not you should be doing your own DIY maintenance work, click that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you soon. Ride safe, ride prepared, ride on. Peace.